Welcome, everyone, whether you're from Canada, the US, Europe, Australia, most importantly. We have a very interesting guest today who's very knowledgeable, Raymond Bromhall. He's the leader of the NO5G Party in Australia, and we're very pleased to have him. As most Canadians know, and our international followers know, NCA's been talking about 5G now for 2 to 3 years. We're very active. As far as we know, we're the only federal party in Canada that cares about this issue. Something's wrong, but we're going to shed light on it today with Raymond Bromhall. Before we get into that, Raymond's done a lot of work on the lockdowns. And Raymond, I want to be very clear to you. You have the Australian people have our utmost sympathy for what they endured during that tyrannical lockdown. And don't get me wrong, it was bad in Canada. There was obviously federal lockdown, provincial lockdown, municipal lockdowns. People were treated like garbage. Non-essential workers, essential workers, they were dividing us. Vaccinated, non-vaccinated, and then you get all the other divisions going on there. Far right, all this nonsense of dividing people, Raymond. But the stuff we heard in Australia was just terrifying. That government that I pray to God that they're still not in power. But as far as we could see from a distance, Raymond, they were horrific. Could you shed light on this?
Yeah, certainly. The Australian people obviously reacted very harsh against the government at the time, which was what we call a Liberal government. And thankfully, we just had an election, and we overturned the federal government, and we now have a new Labor government in power. So,
but hold on a sec. But they were identified as so-called conservative.
That's correct.
And it's funny. It's funny you call them a liberal.
Yes.
But they identify as so-called conservative. Remember that, everyone in Canada. Remember that. Go ahead, Raymond.
Yeah, so there were literally riots in the streets, and there was a lot of people very upset with the mandates, etc., that was going on in the lockdowns. There was a lot of other issues that were raised, but the reality is that the minor sort of parties did have a lot of influence, and you'd find that it really sent a very strong message to the Australian government, and thankfully they've been overturned, and we have a new government. So it'll be interesting to see how things transpire from that.
That's great news.
Yes,
because some of the reports, they were beating people up, they were throwing them in prison, they were.
It was terrible. I mean, they were even, in riot gear, etc., where anybody that even mentioned anything about the lockdowns, even medical practitioners, I represent, just to give you an idea, 600 medical practitioners just in Australia who have been affected by the lockdown, and in fact been dismissed because they haven't, they refuse to go with the mandates. And as our medical system is in crisis because of it. And that was just in one little state, in the little state of Tasmania. But the reality is that they've been censored by their own medical authorities to, if they even speak out about the issue, they'll be disciplined. And so it's become a real, almost a totalitarian type impost on a lot of people in Australia. Anyone that speaks out about it, you're censored, or you're dismissed or sacked from your employment. There's, it's and so much so that they're passing laws to allow simple things like for incitement, for example. There's some serious charges of incitement if you so much as even promote going anti-government, that you will in fact be arrested and imprisoned. So a lot of that's going on, which is a real shame.
Yeah, so there is some overlap with Canada. A lot of that stuff occurred in Canada and is still occurring. Raymond?
Sad.
And you know about the trucker protest and how they froze bank accounts. They threw innocent protesters in jail. Some of them are still in jail without due process. Can you believe it, Raymond?
That's outrageous. And what I've noticed is that Canadian law is very, very similar to Australian law because we're both Commonwealth countries, and a lot of our legal systems is obviously derived from the English law. And I think you'll find that a lot of the approaches that we use in Australia would be very similar to Canada in the way. And we use Canadian case law as precedent here in Australia, and I'm sure you use the same and vice versa. But there are some serious problems with the government. They keep passing laws which make it almost impossible in some ways to fight. But thankfully, we have constitutions and we have the legal system where we can fight it. And really, the issue is people need to get up and fight if they in the legal system if they have a grievance about what's going on.
Yeah. So we've had big issues. I just want to touch a bit before we get into 5G. We have what's called the Canadian Charter. It was adopted, not voted in by the majority of the people, right? Right? But by these establishment multi-control politicians in 1982, they decided to give us what they wanted as a constitution. So this is a charter of rights and freedoms.
Yes,
But
yes.
if you look at it, Raymond, the first sentence is limitations on it.
Okay.
Right? So everyone's in shock during the lockdown. All their freedoms and rights are gone,
Well,
and they're saying,
well, the best way to explain it, how to attack it. I've been successful in stopping lockdowns, and in fact, they're removing mandates left, right, and centre here in Australia. We've been doing a very concerted campaign here in Australia to, I guess you could say, undermine the what's been happening in regards to the lockdown situation, particularly with the mandates. We found that the best way to explain it in a really quick way, and the approach that we use is that the best way to explain it is if you go to get an inoculation, okay, and you're being forced to by your employer or forced by the government. If you don't, you can't get access to services, or you can't get access to your employment or your place of work, or etc. The reality is that any direction that's given by your employer or by the government is under a form of coercion. So if you fail to follow that direction, you will be either terminated or you won't have access to the service or whatever. Now, the reality is that because there's that coercion, it removes your freedom of choice or your freedom to enter into an arrangement or an agreement. Now, the reality is that anybody that gets an inoculation without under that coercion process is technically not consenting to having that inoculation. So even though they go to the doctor and get it, or a vaccinate, an inoculation provider, you'll find that technically it becomes non-consensual, even if you filled out a form to say you consented, etc., because there is a form of coercion behind it. The reality is then it becomes technically an assault on the individual. And by placing a needle into someone and then injecting I guess you could say, a substance which is designed to create a disease in you, such as an immunity, for example, which causes that, you have what we call and you had the same thing in Canada, I'm sure, it becomes what we call a grievous bodily harm because it can't be removed and it remains in the system. And therefore you have an assault issue. And anyone that's implicated and aid and abets in that assault is also criminally liable. So what I use here in Australia is I use the criminal codes to attack the perpetrators of this mandate. So basically, that's how it works. So now, if anyone dies from an adverse reaction to the issue, that then could technically become a homicide or in some cases even murder if there's an intention behind it. So it's a very powerful tool that we use. And in Australia, we also have, instead of going down the civil route, we go down the criminal route, and we do things like what we call private prosecutions against the perpetrators. So instead of doing a civil one, we go down the criminal side. A private prosecution is commenced by private individuals, not the police. And Canada would also have a private prosecution arrangement there. So that's sort of where we go. That's just a very tip of the iceberg sort of arrangement, but it's been working. We've managed to even not even have to go to court by basically putting on notice the perpetrators, and once they realise where the illegality of what's going on, they tend to back down and remove their mandates, and that's sort of how we've been operating here in Australia.
Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting approach.
Mm. And
Here in Canada, the legal focus has been on the charter, but
mhm.
it faces so many hurdles, Raymond, and plus with that limitation at the beginning.
Yeah. So what you
So,
do,
but your approach is really interesting, um,
it's
and
simple. And
it's also reality, right?
and the other thing too is
Yeah.
that none of these in Australia, we have a thing called the Australian Immunisation Register, and anybody that gets a inoculation, I hope you don't mind me using the term inoculation, but I've got to. But if they get an inoculation, you'll see that they are doctors and inoculation providers must report it to a federal agency called the Australian Immunisation Register. Now, in order to enforce a mandatory direction, you have to provide proof of your immunisation status, and the only way to get it is to get it from the Federal Register. Now, the interesting thing is that the Federal Register was actually set up and said, and it basically says when it was originally set up, it was designed specifically for funding purposes and not for enforcing mandatory directions. And in fact, you'll see in the statement that was made, which is a statement of compatibility that they have to make in regards to human rights. It says at the start when they introduced it to Parliament, they made it very clear that it was not to be used for mandatory inoculations. I better use the word inoculation because I can't use the V word.
Yeah.
But basically, that then basically meant that Parliament intended it not be used to enforce mandatory inoculations. And so I use that to very strong effect. And the reality is it's actually an offence if anybody uses the Australian Immunisation Register to use it for mandating purposes. And in fact, it's a 5-year imprisonment term. So,
Wow.
so we use that as an angle. Now, I'm sure in Canada you'd have a similar system of some sort, I'd imagine, where you have a federal register. Have a good look at the register and see what is what was it first established for. If you have protected information, which this is, if you're being immunised, you go into the register. You'll see that there are some privacy clauses on there, and you'll find that there will be no real ability for states in particular to use the information from the register for those purposes.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's a big limitation on that. And so that's what I've been working on. It's been very successful here in Australia.
Excellent stuff. Well, the government has been making it clear to us here in Canada, Raymond, that Canadians have no absolute right to property, private property.
Well, really?
Yes. Okay, and this is tied into 5G and all the stuff we're going to talk about. I'm going to bring
Okay.
it up later. Another
Hmm.
one is we have no absolute right to privacy. And
Well,
the cornerstone, Raymond, is back to the charter, right? Because that's the foundational document. And
mhm.
there's the first section is limitations, right?
Well, one thing you do is, even though, like, we have the same thing here in Australia, they say that we have no right to privacy either. But you'll find that we do have privacy acts which have been placed in. And the trick is to go through the Privacy Act and then start and basically work out where the breaches are that have made through either privacy acts, or in this case, there must be a Canadian immunisation register, for example. You can go
Yeah.
through that and see if there are privacy protections. And that's what you use. So any human rights charter would only apply specifically to that particular side of things. But what you can do in regards to privacy is that there are international covenants which Canada and signed, and you just have to go through and work out, okay, has it been ratified? Has it been brought into domestic law in Canada from treaties that have been signed in regards to torture provisions, for example? Believe it or not, the immunisation mandates actually are classified as torture, particularly if it inflicts state-sanctioned grievous bodily harm against its citizens. Then we have a torture issue. So I use that as well. Now, the thing is that you'll find that privacy, you really have to look at case law and common law in order to protect your privacy, more so than statute. And one thing that you'll find is that when you're dealing with various situations in court, you have, there are two, I guess you could say you've got your common law, but when you go into, there's a court of equity, which you can actually apply. We have that in Australia. It's a very unusual, people, what's this court of equity? And usually what happens in the court of equity is you can actually go into that court and actually remove any legislation that works on whether or not it's conscionable or not. Is it a conscionable wrong, moral wrong? Then you can get statute overturned. The other thing too,
excellent.
Yeah, and you can actually apply to the High Court to actually have any piece of legislation that you feel is eroding on your fundamental rights, and you can actually have that piece of legislation made void, inoperable, basically, by doing that. So there are protection mechanisms. It's just a way of really understanding how it all works in order to fight.
Yeah, I'll just add one last thing. The Canadian Privacy Act, that's the legislation governing privacy subject to the Charter, the Constitution. In there, it states any government department, agency, as long as it's written in their mandate, can invade privacy, whether through facial recognition or right.
Well, that's interesting because
that's it.
Well, the reality is,
CSIS, the Canadian Secret Service, it's in their mandate, so they can violate anyone's privacy, and then you can look at other agencies, right?
Yes.
So
we got Five Eyes, which Australia.
Five Eyes. Yeah.
Five Eyes, which Australia is obviously in a treaty. Well, not a treaty, but an agreement with Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and the US, and basically it's a spy agency. I guess you'd say an agreement to spy. But the reality is what they're doing is they're circumventing the law by basically getting Australian agencies to spy on Canadian citizens. There are obviously some laws in Canada that says that Canadians can't spy on Canadians. So what they do is they get the Australians to spy on the Canadians, citizens, and then put it into their database, and then the Canadian authorities can get access to that. So that's sort of how it works, and vice versa. And there's been real controversy about Five Eyes and how it works. But the reality is that they're now getting very blatant and very open, and then they're starting, as you're saying, they're opening up legislation that allows them to just do it. Now, the issue is that people need to attack it. I mean, whilst it's in vogue, you can always remove a piece of legislation by simply making a claim in the court. In Australia, we have what we call the High Court, and we go to the High Court to argue that a piece of legislation is abhorrent, or it affects our fundamental rights, and you can actually get rid of it.
Okay, excellent.
Realise that there are rights there.
I just want to add one thing before we get into 5G.
Yes.
We have a number of Australians that follow us, and so we've been listening to their reports. And there were some disturbing events that happened within the last year. There was claims coming out of Australia that the police, Secret Service were using directed weapon systems, direct energy weapons. Also,
correct.
sonic weapons on
Yes.
innocent protesters. Can you
Yes.
talk about that, please, Raymond?
Yes. In at Parliament House in Canberra, which is our main, I guess you could say, our central. I mean, the capital city of Australia is Canberra, and Canberra there was a protest that, well, not a protest, but a rally, a freedom rally, I guess you'd say, going to the steps. And on that, they had what we call an active denial system, which is basically a sonic weapon, really, which is designed to, I guess you could say, disperse crowds and everything using electromagnetic radiation. And they, in fact, admitted that they used it. And they said, oh, but we're only using it as a speaker system. We're only using it to broadcast and talk. Well, just the fact that they were talking on that thing was enough to show that they had the thing activated. It's commonly known as an active. Raytheon make a lot of these sort of devices. You'll see that it's a simple, they use sonic weapons. A good example of what I'm talking about would be to have a look at the active denial systems. The other thing is to have a look at a thing called the mosquito, which is a deterrent that a lot of you probably got them in councils in Canada. The same thing here in Australia, where they use a sonic type electromagnetic radiation device, which sends out frequencies at certain frequencies that actually inhibit pain on people, assault people, and they're using those as well legally in your country, same as we got here, and they're called the
Yeah,
mosquito. They're a
mosquito.
deterrent device, yes, and you'll
Yeah,
see that, and just start looking into those. But yes, that's exactly what happened here in Australia. Yes, they were using, and when I saw that, I nearly fell off my chair when I saw that they were actually had right up on Parliament. A lot of people wouldn't know, and there were things like phones being freezed, like they couldn't use their mobile phones.
hmm,
A lot of people were having EHS symptoms, which electromagnetic hypersensitivity is a
yeah,
real issue. And you'll find that a lot of them were getting a similar thing like the Havana syndrome that you've probably heard of as well. So
yes.
there was a lot of that going on. Yes, it's pretty obvious, in my opinion, that they had it activated and they were using that device.
Yeah, just to be clear to our listeners, this is directed energy or I would argue radiation weapon.
It's a direct energy
And
weapon.
and and Raymond mentioned it's also called active denial system.
That's correct.
And Lockheed Martin makes one.
Yes.
I was looking into it. It's called high frequency. They actually use high frequency millimeter, which is 5G
Hmm.
wavelengths, in electromagnetic um, beams
Well,
of energy.
that's exact, and it's
And
designed to penetrate.
basically, they're heating up people.
That's right.
So
They're
so
using.
this is like a smaller scale of HARP. The HARP system where they're beaming the upper atmosphere and heating it
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
And
Well, they.
apparently Russia has the same technology, and they were apparently testing some in Ukraine. There were some reports about that.
Yeah. Well, the
But
whole
but
issue
but
is
but this is real, Raymond.
real, and the thing
Yeah,
is that you have an unprovoked attack on Australian citizens, or in Canada or anywhere else it is. And the reality is that electromagnetic radiation actually penetrates the skin. It actually is
yeah,
designed. It does go through. And when you have a touching of a person without their consent, that's an assault. It's as simple as that.
yeah.
So there are criminal
Oh,
issues in
interesting.
using this.
Yeah,
And if you're just a bystander and you're just doing indiscriminate assault on individuals you might not even be part of the rally, but you might just be a bystander walking past or driving your vehicle past, or it could be any number of reasons. You could be just one of the workers there maintaining a ticket stall or whatever it might be, or a shop. You've got absolutely nothing to do with it, and you're not committing any offence. Is the use of such weapons legal under law? And I suggest that they're not legal. And when you start to look at when they passed these weapons in, they didn't realise just how much it actually, that it does actually breach the criminal code and our fundamental right to our bodily autonomy and not to be assaulted by the state. It becomes a form of torture, is what we're talking about.
Yeah, excellent. I just want to clarify the Havana syndrome to some of our listeners who may not be aware about that. This is a syndrome that was coined, Raymond, in I guess Havana, Cuba. U.S.
Yeah,
diplomats were getting symptoms similar to EMF radiation sickness,
that's correct.
headaches, yeah, all this
Yeah,
stuff, and apparently it's spread to other embassies, U.S. embassies around the world. So there's a
yes.
theory that this is a directed uh, energy or radiation, microwave, millimeter wave weapon that's being targeting these diplomats, Raymond.
Well, Banner syndrome, it's no longer just a theory, it's actually a fact. So they're actually now saying that that's exactly what it was, and
Are
they've
they
actually given
now?
it.
They
Yes,
are.
oh yeah,
They are saying it's a fact, eh?
yeah, that they were in fact targeted, and that they were using these similar systems like the active denial system is basically what we're talking about, and that they were basically targeting individuals. And this is the whole issue about 5G,
Yeah.
is that they can target using beamforming anyone they want, basically using this technology.
But
Mm.
the important point from our perspective, Raymond, about the Havana syndrome
Yes.
is it completely undermines um, the establishment, the mainstream narrative that there's no non-thermal health effects.
Oh, look, that I
Right,
can
right.
really
No,
hit
but
you right
this
between the
totally
eyes with all.
disproves it. Because if you go to
Well, not only.
they'll say, oh no, 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 it's all in your mind. Oh, you got headaches, you can't sleep, you got nosebleeds, right?
All right.
Oh
Well,
yeah, but
what you got there,
right,
you're right,
right.
Stephen. And I can really, if you want me to go into that, I'll go right into it. So
No,
as
but
I'll
I'm just
explain.
saying that totally undermines their narrative.
Oh, very much so. And the biggest thing that
Yes, yeah,
undermines it is in Australia, we had a doctor here who I was doing a court case where against a national broadcasting network, which was setting up towers which were going to radiate one of my clients. Now, he took him to court on the angst of basically a peace and good behaviour order type arrangement to stop them from assaulting my client with the radiation. Now, we got the patient, or this particular client, to be diagnosed for having electromagnetic hypersensitivity. And we had a doctor do about a 95-page report on his sensitivity, and basically said that it is an established health effect and that sort of thing. Now, we put that report forward to the court, but then what had happened, which was really interesting, was that the chief medical officer for the state of Queensland decided to make a complaint to the medical authorities about my doctor. Now, he was then thoroughly investigated for they tried to say it was misconduct, that the EHS doesn't exist, etc. Well, guess what? The investigation was thoroughly conducted by his peers. He was put through a rigorous complaints type process, and they found that he had absolutely no case to answer, that his diagnosis was correct, and so on. So really, in effect, that put EHS on the map here in Australia, that it does in fact is an actual ailment. It is a disease.
oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome. So
Um,
the court
well,
upheld
what
that
what
evidence.
well, what had happened is it got to a
Oh,
point where the case was we didn't win the case on that point. But what had happened is when they realised that we opened the can of worms, it was about 3 weeks later that the National Broadband Network sent out a directive. We told them that it's not the fibre optic cable is safe, it's the wireless that's dangerous, and that all the towers are connected underground by fibre optic cable. And when we raised that in the court, the judge was absolutely scathing of the National Broadband Network and said, well, didn't you promise the Australian people that all homes would be going to be connected to fibre optic cable? Why are you going to fight wireless? Now, what had happened is 3 weeks later after that case, NBN, the Australian government, did a big backflip, and you can Google it if you want. Just Google NBN backflip and you'll see what I'm talking about. And over 8 million homes were then ordered to be reconnected to fibre optic cable. So it was a huge win. So basically, the Australian government now realised just that we're onto them in regards to the assault issue.
excellent.
But But what I'd like to say is the other evidence, and I don't know if you've heard of the Unale case, which is a case that was in Italy. It started in 2002 and finished in 2011. And the Unale case was basically about Vatican radio. There were 19 children who had, I think it was 19, who had died from leukemia, childhood lymphatic leukemia. And basically they were saying that and claiming that it was caused by the radiation from the towers. Now, what had happened, it went through, the Vatican obviously protested and, got a lot of money behind them. And in the end, the court ordered a medical report to be done by the Italian Department of Health, and they came back with a 300-page report that said that the radiation indeed caused the leukemia, and therefore the Vatican radio were liable. So in effect, what the end result was that a Vatican cardinal, also the director of Vatican Radio, was sentenced to jail, and then it was suspended later. But the reality is they got a jail sentence, and they also had to compensate the parents, the families of the children that had died in the village. Now, if that's not evidence, here we've got court evidence to indicate that yes, there is problems with this. What's really important that everyone has to understand is this. In 2002, the World Health Organization, made a declaration to the world on the advice of the International Agency for Research on Cancer that children should not be exposed long-term to any radiation over 0.3 of a microtesla, because there is a close association between that exposure and childhood lymphatic leukemia. Okay, very, very important. So this is the World Health Organization saying the magnetic field from non-ionizing radiation, there is a consistent association between that exposure and childhood lymphatic leukemia in 2002. All right. Now, to give you an idea, the mobile phone I'm talking to you on right now, I have studies that show that my mobile phone irradiates 6,200 microtesla. That's just my phone. So you imagine what the towers are going to do, the satellites, the high altitude platform stations that are circling up space, in the stratosphere and so on. How much more electromagnetic radiation we're being exposed to. So kids should not be exposed. And if you Google World Health Organization right now, you'll see, and you'll see under long-term exposure, it says 0.3 of a microtesla. But even they say there's no established health effects, which is absolutely outrageous. But
it is outrageous.
Yeah. And what another very critical, important thing for everyone to understand is this. Who diagnoses patients with electromagnetic hypersensitivity or exposure to, the dangers and the health dangers in regards to exposure? It is not our protection agencies. In Australia, we have a thing called the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, which is trying to tell everyone that it's only a thermal effects that's evolved, and there's no other, that non-ionizing radiation, there are no established health effects. Well, to be quite clear with that, the doctors do not use those guidelines, the APANSA safety standards, in order to treat and diagnose their patients. They use the World Health Organization's International Classification of Diseases. And if you have a look at what we call the ICD-10, which is the International Classification of Diseases, and I think that's been updated to number 11 now, you'll see that under the W90 classification, it does in fact say that exposure to non-ionizing radiation, in particular radio frequency, is a classification for injury that doctors use for treating patients. That's how I do it. It's under the W90 classification. So, doctors do not use the safety standards. They use their own medical standards, which is created through the World Health Organization. So even though the World Health Organization in one side is saying this, their other side of it, in the health side of it, is saying completely opposite. So there is enough established evidence out there. In fact, we had under legislation here, we have the Specialist Medical Review Council, which is set up in Australia for veterans who have been exposed to, munitions or anything like that in the workplace while they're they're fighting or whatever they do as veterans. Now, what it is they came to the conclusion. They did a big investigation, looked at exactly the same studies as our safety guideline standard organisation agency did, and they came to a completely different conclusion. And they said that there was sound medical and scientific evidence, and we're saying sound scientific and medical evidence to include exposure to non-ionising radiation, in particular radio frequency, and cancer, lymphatic leukemia in adults, in their veterans. So there's plenty of evidence there.
Yes, there is.
And it's been completely negligent for people like ICNIRP, agencies like ICNIRP, and which is the International Commission for Non-Ionising Radio Protection, who are clearly not on our side, to come out and say stupid remarks and say that there is no established health effects. Well, that's a complete negligent, misleading statement to make.
Yeah, excellent stuff. I'm just gonna, if it's okay with you, Raymond, I'm just gonna share some perspective from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Based on what you said, it seems like we're a bit worse off than Australia, believe it or not, in terms of this issue. In 1978, I'm just going to give some historical background. I'll put some links up. 1978, yes. Raymond, it was called the Safety Code 6. These are our national standards for EMF radiation.
Yes.
The troubling part here, and I'm going to put a link. These Safety Code 6 has never been updated since, Raymond.
Yes.
So we're now 2022. It's never been updated. That's almost 50 years without updating it.
50?
It's almost 50 years.
50 years?
And it has not been updated by these corrupt multi-control parties in Ottawa, the multi-control deep state in Canada. They're in bed with the telecommunication industry. They're putting the telecommunication industry, and also I would argue the agenda of this reset, fourth industrial revolution, ahead of public health. And, it's just, and it's been their agenda going back decades, right? So they basically, what they're doing is saying there's no non-thermal health effects. There's no biological health effects from EMF radiation. It's only heating of your skin, similar to Australia. Yeah. But it gets, I just want to preface this a bit further. The Safety Code 6 is tied to the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. This is connected to WHO. It's kind of like the International Radiation Protection bureaucracy. It's a 13-person self-appointed committee with ties to the telecommunication industry. And we have it on our blog. And about money changing hands, and they're all in their nice suits and they're doing well because the telecommunication is quite powerful worldwide, right? So, but it gets worse. There's a guy from Australia. His name is Michael Repacholi.
That's
he's from Tori, Australia. Get this, Raymond. He did his PhD at the University of Ottawa in Canada, and he advised on Safety Code 6 in 1977.
Well, he was
and he's completely tied to WHO, and this is kind of like the unipolar world order, right? The infrastructure, right? So he's tied to them. It's interchange between WHO and that international commission, and they are in complete denial of non-thermal health effects like leukemia, cancer, blood disorders, organ disorder, infertility, etc., etc. So this is and then you get the mainstream media in Canada. It's just quicker. They don't talk about it. Then you get these mainstream pundits on radio. Oh, there's no health effects. This is just conspiracy. Raymond, this is what's going on. most Canadians think it's safe, so they're putting themselves in harm's way.
Well, the media are the radiators. The
Yes,
broadcasters are the radiators. But the reality is, Michael Repicelli, he was the one that formed ICNIRP in the first place. And if you have a look at, and he was an Australian, and
yes,
Michael Repicelli is no longer there, but you've got a guy called Rodney Croft. Rodney Croft, who's the head of ICNIRP, he's also from Australia. And Rodney Croft used to work for an energy provider in the United States. But not only that, he's a psychologist. He has absolutely no health background whatsoever. And one thing we've found here in Australia is that our gurus who have set up these safety standards haven't got any health qualifications whatsoever.
yeah,
And they even admit on their own website that they can't give health advice. Yet here they are giving health advice to the Australian government. They going now with the same guy doing it through ICNIRP as the head of ICNIRP, giving health advice to the rest of the world when they're not qualified to do
yeah,
so.
yeah, yeah.
That's
This
medical
is
advice to
epitome.
a lawyer, you know.
This is epitome of global corruption.
Well, we found that you've got organisations such as AMTA, which is the Australian Mobile Telecommunications Association, and you've got the IEEE, and you've got various organisations around the world, which are all industry based, and they lobby. I guess what I'm trying to say is we have what we call government capture or agency capture, and ICNIRP and our safety authorities are all being captured by industry.
Yeah,
And really, it's all about lobbying and getting their own
yeah,
their own thing out. And the media, unfortunately, are in a problem. We found, to give an idea, when the World Health Organization declared in 2002 that there was a consistent association between that exposure with 0.3 of a microtester and so on, was because in Australia we did a study. There was a guy by Dr. Bruce Hocking who did in 1995 did a study around 3 broadcast towers in Sydney, and he found there was a cancer cluster of children who were being exposed to electromagnetic radiation, and he wrote a report that was then emulated throughout various other studies throughout the world, which then forced the International Agency for Research on Cancer to declare that there was a problem, and that's when the World Health Organization stepped in. Now, the reality is that what's happened with ICNIRP is they've wiggled their way in. They're a group that's got no government backing, authority whatsoever. It's just really an industry-backed organisation who seem to make it look like they're the gurus in regards to radiation. And unfortunately, every country in the world seems to be following ICNIRP. But I'm starting to see cracks in it where some countries are removing anything to do with ICNIRP and distancing themselves because they realise that there's a big problem.
yeah,
Anyway, that's a big issue.
yeah.
And
I just want to go ahead.
yeah, if I could say something too, and this is something I think everybody needs to understand this, is that electromagnetic radiation does indeed activate dormant viruses in the human body. Now, a lot of us have viruses that are I guess you could say, in our system that I give you an idea. 20 million people around the world apparently have dormant HTLV -1 virus, which, believe it or not, is known as the human T cell lymphatic or leukemia virus. That is the one that's activated that causes the leukemia in the kids and also the leukemia in adults. And that's activated by radiation. So when the World Health Organization declared that it was a consistent association between that exposure and childhood lymphatic leukemia, you can see that it was based on the activation of this dormant virus. Now, Epstein-Barr virus is also very well, you can just Google it, at 50 hertz. Epstein-Barr virus, commonly known as herpes, can be activated by exposure to non-ionizing radiation. Now, there are other viruses that worldwide, and I don't want to extrapolate, but basically Wuhan was the very first city in the world to implement 5G, and I'll just leave that to you, have a bit of a think about that. The World Radiation Communications Conference, which was held in Egypt in 2019, just before the pandemic, approved high frequency radiation to be used as a free frequency. So to give you an idea, when you use your mobile phone at the moment, it's operating at around 2.4 to 5 gigahertz, okay? Now, that sounds, basically you don't need to be licensed to have that on your mobile phone, and because your phone is also a transmitter. So you don't need to be licensed. So the World Communications Conference agreed to allow very high frequencies in the gigahertz frequencies to be used. Now, if I can refer you and your viewers to a thing called the World Health Criteria and number 16. Health Criteria number 16, produced by the World Health Organization. Now, if you have a look at that World Health Criteria, you'll see it's in regards to radio frequency. And they knew, this was produced in 1981, and it actually says that item 6.4 in regards to micro, I think it's microvellar absorption, it says, and it basically makes it very clear that there were studies that indicated that activation of dormant viruses would occur at 60 gigahertz. There it is, in black and white. So the World Health Organization knew this in 1981.
But it's not creating the virus, it's just activating it. And
it's
also,
yes.
Yeah, and
TS in the human body, yes.
But
yes.
5G, 4G, electromagnetic radiation doesn't only activate; it does bodily harm itself. Raymond.
Yeah, it does. It does two things.
Because TS was asking that. Does it cause cancer outright? I would argue, based on the science, and I'm going to share some of it today, that it actually does.
Well, what it does is it activates dormant viruses in the human body, and those viruses cause cancer. So leukemia is a cancer; it's a blood cancer.
Yeah.
I mean, so the reality is that yes, if your virus has been reactivated, which a lot of people are born with it because it comes from their parents. There are a lot of transmissions from animals that come to humans. A good example is HIV. Is another one that can be activated by exposure to radiation and so on. So what I'm saying is that yes, it can activate the virus and then it becomes infectious and then it can go to other people that way. But the reality is that a lot of these viruses do in fact cause cancer, breast cancers, all sorts of cancers. Yeah.
How does it activate? Is it compromising the immune system? Is it?
Well, how it works is it basically stimulates the virus. So the virus, believe it or not, viruses can actually have a frequency themselves, and some frequencies are extremely high. And they use, as you know, electromagnetic radiation to destroy. They use it in radiotherapy, for example, and they use gamma rays at extremely high frequencies to destroy it. So in a sense, what they're doing is activating the virus, but then killing it because it's overactivating it. Now, the other thing too is that you'd have to, there's plenty of studies that indicate that activation process. Without going into great detail about it, it also, there's studies out there that show that secondary infections from bacterium, particularly the Klebsiella pneumonia bacteria, is actually increased exponentially in its growth if it's exposed to low frequency radiation. So there are plenty of studies and plenty of evidence that indicates that, and that they've known this since 1978. In fact, the World Health Organization show that in their health criteria. I think Frolic was the main proponent to the activation or reactivation of dormant viruses in the human body by the radiation. And the process, I guess it's really more of a stimuli. They use it a lot in science to either shut down a virus by hitting it with radiotherapy with the radiation, or vice versa. And let's face it, they all have, I guess you could say that's the best way to explain it. I can't go any further wrong.
Could your team provide some links for
very much
the audience? That would be helpful.
So just do Google 50 Hertz Epstein-Barr virus, 50 HZ Epstein-Barr, that'll come up. If you Google the World Health the health criteria number 16 for the World Health Organization, that's available online, very easy to find.
Okay, excellent.
Yep. And just look
Yeah.
for HTLV -1 virus activation. And you've got there are 6 different strains, which include, and it includes monkey viruses, you name it. So what you're going to see now around the world is it's not just, well, there's one virus that everyone's hearing about right now, but there are other viruses like shingles and Epstein-Barr. You'll find, if you look at very carefully, you'll see that it's Epstein-Barr is the real problem, because Epstein-Barr is literally in all of us. And the astronauts, for example, when they go into space, have Epstein-Barr activated because they're in an electronic environment in their capsules, and they're surrounded by electromagnetic radiation, and they come back with activated Epstein-Barr. But Epstein-Barr is a real nasty piece of work, and it's a back cursor in a lot of illnesses in the world. And you'll find that with the current pandemic that's around now, that the majority of people have activated Epstein-Barr. In fact, a lot of people probably don't realise that if you've been immunised, there's a good chance that you have had your Epstein-Barr is now activated. Okay,
Yeah.
so there's talk about conjecture about certain magnetic components being in the immunisations. Well, the reality is I've looked into that. I couldn't seem to find that, but there is magnetite in the human brain anyway, which we naturally do have that in us. But as far as it being used as a delivery system in regards to graphene oxide and a few other things, I don't think that seems to be the case. But from the studies I've seen, but certainly, you know, the activation of various viruses that are dormant in our system, which we've genetically been there for hundreds of thousands of years in our system, are now unfortunately being reactivated, in my
Yeah. I
opinion.
just want to add some other relevant information. At 60 gigahertz, it's acknowledged by the telecommunication industry, also independent science, that oxygen molecules
Yes,
absorb
often,
EMF radiation at 60 gigahertz. And the
that's correct.
analogies, it's like food in a microwave
Yes.
getting heated up, everyone. So I've done a lot of towers. I've been measuring and studying.
Hmm.
I've been around maybe 2.8 gigahertz, at most 3 right now. And I
Yeah.
feel the oxidative stress. I have trouble breathing, Raymond.
Yeah. Yes.
But at 60 gigahertz, we're talking about severe oxidative stress to the point where people may collapse. And that could be corresponding to Wuhan,
Yes.
like
Well,
the videos.
you have a look at the reactivation of the dormant viruses, and they mention oxidative stress all the way through it.
Yes.
This is it's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
60, use that frequency because it does deplete the oxygen, and it apparently the waves to go a lot quicker through
Yeah.
through space. But the reality is that yes, they know that it does deplete it. It is causing some real issues, and my concern more so than anything is that the reality is it's actually touching and penetrating our bodies non-consensually, and it's indiscriminate irradiating of you and I, and if you don't want it to be touched or penetrated by this radiation, you have the right in your own home to say, I do not want to be touched by this radiation.
Yeah.
The case I mentioned to you in regards to NBN network, what they did, even though we didn't technically win the case, they actually did then change. We said in our court case that we don't care where you go with radiation as long as you don't direct it and penetrate and touch my client. So they've now diverted the antenna so it doesn't touch my client's house. So that's a clear admission that they know that it does
Oh
touch
yeah.
and
And we've
penetrate.
actually measured them. We know.
Yeah,
There's endless studies. There's hundreds of studies. We'll provide some links. The Bio
yeah.
Initiative,
The by initiative
2000, the Bio Initiative 2012. It's been
yeah,
updated now, I believe, to 220. They got
yeah.
hundreds of scientific reports documented there. I just want to get back to um, this guy Michael
Rappaccoli?
Repaccioli.
Yes.
He advised The corrupt government, the multi-controlled establishment in Canada, as I mentioned, they got him to advise on our Safety Code 6 standards, Raymond, that have
Yes.
never been updated for now almost 50 years.
Yes.
The standards are set so high, your arm would have to be on fire for those standards to kick in. There's no mention of non-thermal, but this is a quote from this guy, Michael. He says, the goal for these standards is to set the safety limits that do not kill people while technologies work. Quote, set safety standards limits that do not kill people while technology works. Think about that. What he's acknowledging that this technology kills. Okay, number one. Number two, is he talking about kill someone instantaneously? Because we know for a fact, based on the science, that it's a cumulative exposure. It could be kids getting cancer in 5 years, adults in maybe 10, 15, 20. You see, Raymond? They
Yeah.
know. This
They
is
know.
absolute, I'm sorry, this is absolute systemic corruption here. It's putting public health way in the back. It's a collateral damage to pursue profit and whatever agenda they have for this technology, Raymond. It's sick.
He's not a medical practitioner. How can he go out and tell the world about health? He's a physicist.
No, but the
He is not.
governments are using him.
I
He-
know, and this is the idiot care, I guess you could say, and the whole basis and what makes the whole thing fall down is that you've got these people out there who have got no medical qualifications whatsoever, dictating to the world on health.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is not on. All
Yeah,
right,
but
and,
the problem is a lot of people believe it.
well, you're right, and this is what you got to fight.
Yeah, most Canadians, you look at them and they think you're crazy or you're they're
No.
so programmed. But there's
But
more
mate,
and more people waking up, thank goodness. But I wanna share this. I don't know if you heard of it's 8 items, and this is all scientifically based.
okay.
And I'm just gonna the short to give people an idea of the health effects from the EMF radiation. Have you heard of Martin Powell,
Yeah.
PhD?
Yes. You do.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he's done
Well,
amazing work.
Yes.
He's done amazing work. So this is a summary of the health effects. Number one, attack our nervous systems, including our brains. Number two, attack our hormonal systems. And this is linked to single-celled creatures, our nervous system, right? The third one, produce oxidative stress, free radical damage, which is quite serious.
Yes.
The fourth one, attack the DNA of our cells.
Yes.
Producing single strand, double strand breaks in cellular. And I'm going to get back to that at the end. Number 5, produce elevated levels of apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. That can't be good. Leading to neurodegenerative diseases and infertility. This is all based on science.
Yes.
Lower male and female fertility.
That's actually a fact.
That is a fact.
That one is well and truly established about how it will affect fertility. Yes, in regards to males.
Yeah, here's the other one. Produce excessive intracellular calcium and excessive calcium signaling.
Yeah, so it affects your voltage channels. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Calcium channels.
And there's a lot of doctors that have talked about that. Number 8, attack the cells of our bodies to cause cancer.
Well, in reactivation of certain things. Yes, exactly. And
But
it
he's
gives you
saying literally attack our cells,
that's correct.
triggering cancer.
Yeah. What I
So
can tell you this is that to back it up for you, we have in Australia, we have the APANSA safety standards, which is our guidelines equivalent to yours that you mentioned before. Now, what I've learnt is go and look at the documents that support they always give you supporting documents and supporting studies. Now, one supporting study was by Dr. Bruce Hocking, who's the one that did that cancer cluster study, remember? Well, in fact, they actually recruited him to work on their side. Now, they rely on his study in regards to safe effects. Now, what he says is this. In his study, and it's openly there, and I use this, where it says that if you should not be, in regards to, we talked about the magnetic fields. I'm now going to talk about the electric fields. As you know, electromagnetic radiation has two sources. One is the magnetic field, and the other one's the electric field. Now, he says in his study, in the electric field, that if you're exposed to 0.75 volts per meter, that you will have, it'll affect your synapse activity of the brain, okay? At 6 volts per meter, it'll affect your nerves. So it'll actually start, affecting the nerves. At 12 volts per meter, it will affect your heart muscle. And in fact, it's life-threatening. It can induce cardiac arrests.
yes.
And it's particularly dangerous in regards to people who've got pacemakers and those sorts of things. But at 12 volts per meter, now what's really interesting is they've said at 12 volts per meter, yet you've got towers who are actually admitting, in some cases, up to 19 volts per meter being irradiated from these towers. So you've got 19 volts per meter that you and I have been hit with, and yet you've got their own safety standards that say 12 volts per meter will affect your heart. And it's a dangerous situation. An ambulance should be called. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the trick is, Stephen, is to look into the studies that your safety standard guideline people rely on, the agency rely on. Really look through the study and pick out the stuff that is pertinent.
Okay. Yeah.
Excellent
point. And we do a lot of field work at NCA.
Mm-hmm.
We were visiting measuring towers. One of our guests had a pacemaker.
Yes.
And it was 3 towers in kind of like a triangle.
Yes, you'll get
the meter was maxed out. Guess what? Her pacemaker started malfunctioning.
Yes, it will.
She almost collapsed. We had to take her away right away.
I'm sorry about that. That is sad.
Raymond, but I'm just confirming. I'm confirming on the ground reality with what you're saying. I've been at these towers. My breathing's been affected. And
brain fog. You get heart palpitations.
Yeah, exactly. All that. And the tragedy is that most people are programmed to think that it's safe by the mainstream media, by these multi-controlled politicians, by Health Canada, the Health Authority, even provincial, municipal. What's really disturbing, Raymond, is that they're actually increasing the radiation now.
Well, they are.
Okay.
And what?
Hold on a second. But I want to talk about Health Canada here. It's so corrupt here. It's so one-sided that they were challenged in 2015, Raymond, and all those beautiful scientific reports. They redacted them. Yes. They only used the ones that favored their policy.
So they cherry picked, is what you're saying.
Yes.
They cherry picked it and said, okay, no, we're only relying. They don't count.
They don't count. And basically I call these puppet politicians, because there's bigger forces controlling them. All they do is write the legislation for it, and they get their paycheck and whatever. But this is a really sinister agenda. It's totally counter to public health and well-being. These people, Raymond, these people got to be psychopaths. Look what they're doing.
Well, you're right. Well, we can understand this is an industry capture. So basically, the telecommunications industry has absolutely captured all the vehicles that are going to educate the legislators, educate the councils, and so on. So the issue is that you've got to intervene with that. You've got all this misleading information being sent to politicians, misleading information being sent to bureaucrats within departments,
No.
and this has got to stop.
No.
And
Yeah, but it's
so what
deeper than that. It's deeper
was
because there's an establishment. They have 20,
that's correct.
50-year, 100-year plans. They know what they're
Yeah,
doing. They know what the health effects are.
yeah,
Raymond,
they
come
do.
on. And
Again,
the way these political systems, there could be like one member of parliament that speaks up. They'll just get rid of them.
the biggest one that you can raise is this. You try and get, and this is a really good example, is Lloyd's of London and insurance companies will not insure anyone
Yeah.
from being injured by electromagnetic radiation, because they already know, and they've done studies. You can see this if you look into Lloyd's of London, you'll see where they've done studies on radiation, and they've come to the conclusion they're not going to insure and underwrite any insurance. As you know, Lloyd's is probably the largest underwriter in the world, and you'll find that most insurance, well, I don't know of any insurance company that would actually insure, and that if that doesn't send alarm bells to legislators and so on, I don't know what can,
Well, they
because
don't
it's
care. They know the
well,
science. They're
yes,
working in cahoots with Health Canada,
but
with the
what you
International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, who,
how do you do it here
and
in
they're
Australia?
also, hold on a sec, Raymond, they're also collaborating. The
Yeah,
Canadian, Australian governments, UK, US, Five
yeah,
Eyes, right? They know what
yeah,
they're doing. They know what the
yeah.
health effects. Raymond, that's a fair assumption. They know, yet they're doing this.
Well, what you do is this: is you have to put them on notice that they do know, and that they have a duty of care. And the thing is, there's a thing, and you hit them with the science, if you know what I mean. But you basically say, and I put them on notice. There's a thing, there's a tort in, and you'd have it in Canada as well, called misfeasance in public office. Now, what that is that if they use what we call, if they pass something or do something with reckless indifference, knowing that, and this is really what's going on, it's reckless indifference to the harm that it's causing, then anyone that's aggrieved, anyone that gets injured by, has EHS or is injured or whatever, can sue for the tort of misfeasance in public office, and it's specifically a civil action that can be placed against public officers. So, and that includes politicians.
Yeah, but
Okay.
hold on a sec. But the system here in Canada is completely rigged against that. Health Canada says there's no non-thermal health effects. The
Well,
politicians, the multi-controls say there isn't. We have
well,
safety code 6. Hold on, I'm just letting you know it's going to be an uphill battle in court, right? Because they're
well,
going to look at Health Canada, right? But
well,
the bottom line, and also the charter in Canada, the Parliament has the ultimate authority over the country. So the judge may end up saying, well, if you don't like what they're doing with EMF policy, vote someone else in, right? Like NCA. So they did this with the Bank of Canada, which shifted the public lending right. It used to be a public national bank in the best interest of the people. Now it's controlled by the central banking cartel, and they're printing our money like crazy. Someone challenged that, and they ended up. The judge said, "Well, it's political. The parliament has to say. If you don't like them, vote someone else in." Raymond.
well, that's true. Look, the reality is that judges sometimes will get a decision. They'll come along and they go, "Well, this decision's too hard," or it's going to create too much havoc in society. I'm not prepared to make that decision. So therefore, they don't fall on their sword. They basically just dismiss it, and they then expect you to then appeal that particular decision to a higher authority. Now, that's usually how it works. So you find that if a judge is not happy, and they don't want to, just not on my watch. I'm sorry, you're not going to get this through on my watch. That's what they'll do, and you'll end up having to appeal the decision. So, unfortunately, that's what happens with a lot of litigation. Is you've got to go through all those hoops, and the trick is not to give up. And a good example is in Australia, we had a case called McDonald and Comcare, and the doctor I was just telling you about who diagnosed EHS, previously before that, he had a win. He was a client who was actually a doctor himself, was working for CSIRO, which is the Commonwealth Serum Laboratories here in Australia. And he was a scientist, and he was getting sick from being exposed to his computer screen and electromagnetic radiation around him. And he was successful in court. He actually won the case based on his sensitivity to electromagnetic radiation. And you know what it came down to? That he had established a reasonable belief that that's what was affecting him. And that's what the courts relied on and said, well, as far as we're concerned, it's a disease. Therefore, he has it's been attributed to the radiation, more likely than not, and that was how he was awarded the compensation, and so on.
Okay.
And this was actually suing the Commonwealth government, the Australian government, and he was successful. So what I'm saying to you, that you can win these things.
Yeah, but it's tough because the whole system has been rigged for no liability for non-thermal harm.
Well, hang on. No, that's not correct.
At least in Canada, they don't even recognize non-biological effects.
Exactly. They'll say only for civil claims. It only provides protection. And if you look at it very carefully,
okay,
and I found that loophole was that it doesn't protect them for criminal plaints.
Criminal.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's only for civil.
Yeah.
So
I see.
The assault angle. Because they can't hide behind the Telecommunications Act and saying, and if you look very carefully at the Act, it more than likely will say that it gives an immunity in regards to civil issues.
Sure.
They cannot legislate to give criminal. Sorry, I've been off there. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm back.
You were frozen there. Yeah. Go ahead, Raymond.
Sorry, Stephen. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, it's not being exposed. Like the reality is the civil and criminal side. There's two different immunities. The immunity, they cannot legislate to give you criminal immunity, in my opinion, under the Telecommunications Act.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right.
No, that's an excellent approach. I just want to update everyone on what's going on in Canada. We just
I can hardly hear you. Sorry, Stephen.
Can you hear me now?
No, I think we've had a bit of a trouble with our.
Hold on, I'm just checking.
I can't hear you at all.
Hold on a sec. Test.
Oh, sorry about this.
Hold on a sec. He's gonna come back in. We're gonna wrap this up. We'll wait for him to come back in. But isn't this horrific? We're gonna provide links for everyone, but this isn't made up stuff. And Raymond's revealed a lot of important information. And yeah, they are messing. Maybe Crystal. I don't know. I'm just going to give Raymond a couple of minutes to get back in, and then we're going to continue here. I want to talk about what's going on in Canada now. So we're basically what they did in 2020. They auctioned off 3.5 gigahertz. I believe it's in the microwave realm, and it's picking back off the 4G infrastructure. What's happening now? In 2023, they're going to be auctioning at 3.8 gigahertz. And then what we have in 2024, they're going to start introducing the millimeter wave auction. So that's when we're going to really start to see. Here's Raymond now.
Just adding
him in. All right, Raymond, I'm just going to give you an update. I was updating everyone on what's going on in Canada now. So basically in 2020, we got a 4G system right now, infrastructure, wireless, all these cell towers and Wi-Fi and etc. There's about 35,000 base station cell towers across Canada. Um, what they did was in 2020, they introduced 3.5 gigahertz. This was like the introduction of 5G. I believe it's in the microwave realm, piggybacking off of the 4G infrastructure, like in Australia. And
Exactly.
we just learned in 2023, next year, they're going to be introducing auctioning off 3.8 gigahertz. So they're upping the radiation, everyone.
Yes,
2024, they're going to introduce the millimeter wave, which is 5G.
that's correct. And
So that's when it's coming, everyone. Because we get a lot of questions. Is 5G live? Is 5G live? As far as we're concerned, it's not live in the public realm. But
no,
when they start deploying the millimeter wave, then it's going to be live, Raymond.
that's correct. That's correct. And what they're doing is they're setting up infrastructure all over the place. And 4G is, look, 5G can run on 4G infrastructure, and that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
The reality is they're setting up the infrastructure. You'll get these little small cells on telegraph poles all over the place. They're putting up high altitude platform stations, which are these drones that circulate in the sky. They're equivalent to 1,800 base stations. You've
Wow.
also the satellites that are up there. To give you an idea, they're launched from Australia in Wyndham here in Australia. You'll find that they're putting up the whole infrastructure up there. Elon Musk is putting up thousands and thousands of satellites, as you know. We're looking at
Yeah.
around 100,000 satellites with Verizon and other companies and so on. Now, you're probably wondering what this is all about, and I'm going to quickly explain this to you, Stephen. It's not just about data, and it's not just about communications. It's also about power, what we call wireless power transfer. Now, you're wondering why Mr. Musk is getting involved is because his name's Tesla, and we all know about what Tesla's about. And it was about sending electricity around the world without cable. And what they're doing is they're setting up a thing called a wireless power transfer. So basically, the reason they're putting these small cells on your telegraph poles and the satellites and everything is they're going to be sending electricity through the airwaves, through electromagnetic energy, to power your mobile phone, your electrical devices in your home, and they're all being implanted with a 60 gigahertz chip, and it's all designed to basically have electricity basically streamed down to your electric car, etc. So you can walk down the streets without being having to rely on placing your device into a power point in the wall, into a socket into the wall. So check it out. It's called Wireless Power Transfer. Rayathon are the main people behind it. It's been around since the 60s, and they've now really put it into a fine art form. So 5G is about not only data, it's also about transferring of electricity. They're harvesting electricity with the satellites through solar power that comes down through the platform stations, and it's really an electricity grid is what we're talking about. And we're going to be bathed in electromagnetic radiation. And as I said to you, there's a concern with 0.3 of a microtesla from the World Health Organization. It's still there for kids and leukemia and the activation of the dormant virus. So this is a real concern. And I don't think people understand the enormity of what's going on,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
5G is a real concern. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because
Mm.
the radiation levels, because 4G is quite high right now. We've done a lot of
It's-
testing on it. We've
I mean,
seen it. But
yeah.
we're with 5G, you're looking at 10 to 100 times higher radiation levels.
Well,
Raymond?
what's the difference? Yeah, I mean, what's the difference? And I'll use this analogy to explain this to people quite simply. At 50 hertz, your normal electricity that you get through a power point comes at between 50 to 60 hertz, which basically means that for every second, your body is being touched and penetrated by electromagnetic radiation at 50 cycles per second, which means that 50 cycles, 50 times, you're being penetrated by the radiation from the power point. At 60 gigahertz, you're going to be penetrated 60 billion times per second. 60 billion times per second. So there's a
Yeah.
big difference
Yeah. Yeah.
between the normal ambient radiation that you get in your home
Yeah.
to the communications that we're about to be exposed to.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to make a couple other comments here. Another thing they're doing here, I don't know if they're doing in Australia, but in public arenas, for example, they're deploying 5G. Raymond, and it's from the 26 gigahertz up to
Yes,
38.
that's correct.
So
Yeah,
it's crazy. So
yeah, that's
I know
26,
there's, yeah.
26 billion times per second you're going to be
So these
penetrated
are
by this.
kind of like isolated locations, and they're
They're, they're, we've had the same thing here in Australia. They've done that in the 5G rollout. That's what they do. They set up what we call smart cities and smart. They basically start implementing it. Before you know it, it's they do these little testy things. Oh, look, as you can see, everything's perfectly safe, everything's fine, and then they just keep going and off they go. But what I can tell you is it's going to keep going up right up to the 60 gigahertz frequency. It's just going to get absolutely insane.
yeah.
Yeah,
From our perspective, this is tied into the Great Reset, the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution, what we call
mm,
the AI technocracy, the digital
yes.
digital currency, digital ID, the AI robots, self autonomous vehicles, Raymond. So they need the higher processing speeds to run this system.
Well, what's crazy is you're right. Look, the reality is that it's getting to the point where the information is really the gold of the century, and I guess getting access to and controlling the population, the masses through surveillance and so on. Literally, you see the laws are following suit to the technology, and they're basically it's going to get to a point where you'll have absolutely no privacy. Um, the worst thing that I think you'll find in the legislation, I think you'll find in Canada, they're probably introducing it or already introduced it, is where spy agencies and also your police can actually access your data on your computer without you knowing about it, and they can actually change documents on your computer without you knowing it and delete documents. Now, they literally can control your computer. Now, when it comes down to the rule of law, they can literally fabricate evidence on your computer and take control of your life. And in fact, impose penalties and send you to prison by implanting framing material on your computer. That's a concern that everyone should be worried about. And this and facial recognition systems and so on. What you're talking about is with artificial intelligence, is they can create anything and make anything look like it's real through this virtual system to implicate you in crimes that you've never committed, to control you, to access your bank accounts, to freeze them, to literally control your life. And if that's what people want for regimes to be able to do that, and for other people to actually have access in that way, then by all means embrace 5G. But I can tell you now, I think the way the world's going is not going to be a good place when my children grow up, my grandchildren grow up,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
100%. And then look at digital currency. They will know
Yes.
instantaneously all your transactions, where you're spending your money on
Well,
what.
well, your question. I remember when I mean, many years ago, I bought Bitcoin. Okay, I actually remember I bought some Bitcoin, and God forbid, I cannot remember my password or anything like. I bought that nearly. Yeah, I bought some Bitcoin a long time ago, and the thing is, I can't access it, and I know it's worth a lot of money today, but I think I've got about 128 Bitcoins, but I can't, for the love of money, know how to get access to it. And if you don't know your passwords and all that sort of stuff, well, there's a 10-digit password code or whatever. I've got no idea. The I guess the thing is tangible money, and you know that the gold system was always the best system that we ever had, where banks had to have gold in their bank. When you had a $5 note or a dollar note, you could go into the bank and say, "Hey, this is a promissory note. It means that my notes a promise that if I hand it to the bank, you're going to give me $5 in gold back." Okay, that's really what it means. And they got rid of the gold standard, and I assume they've done that in Canada. as well. So no longer do banks have to have a reserve in there of gold in order to print money, and as all these promissory notes, as we call them. So unfortunately, really, it's a virtual. In the old days, you used to have the note actually meant something; it was worth something. But today, they can do what they want. I mean, really, what is the value of money? And unfortunately, it's even progressed further with the Bitcoin scenario, with the cryptocurrency issue. Really, where's the value behind it? And I don't think, I can't meet anyone that can explain to me who controls, who runs Bitcoin or runs this cryptocurrency. There's no checks and balances behind it, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, excellent points. It gets worse for Canada. In 2016, we sold off all of our gold reserves at that point. It started in 2004. Now we have zero gold reserves, the country. So that's something NCA doesn't support. We lost Raymond again. He'll come back in, but Canada has zero gold reserves. It's been sold off by the multi-controlled establishment. So we have a fiat currency, the Canadian dollar. Here's Raymond back. I'll just add him in. Great, you're back, Raymond. So we have zero gold reserves. The fiat Canadian dollar is backed by the euro, basically, and the US fiat dollar. So we're in a real predicament here. So we've been we've been talking about this, what people can do. We're worried about the economy. Now we got this 5G, and you really elucidated it really well today, Raymond. And we want to thank you for doing that. The one issue I want to get back to, I feel there's some latent misinformation through this EMF standards and the organizations. They talk about non-ionizing radiation, Raymond.
Yes.
My personal opinion, I question that. I think it's like the sun's rays. It's a mix of non-ionizing and ionizing. And I refer to Dr. Powell here.
Yes.
Item number 4, attack DNA cells, producing single-strand and double-strand breaks. I'm sorry, everyone. If EMF radiation is producing single, double-strand DNA breaks, that's ionizing radiation. That's just common sense.
Yeah. Well,
this is another fraud. They're manipulating people, Raymond. They're trying to say, don't worry about it. It's non-ionizing. No, we have to question the basic assumptions here.
Well, the whole reality is the radiation is no different. It's the same stuff.
Yeah.
Just because you term it, the radiation, if it's at extremely low frequency at, say, 1 hertz, and then you go up to 60 gigahertz or 120 gigahertz, whatever it is, it's still the same stuff. It's still electromagnetic radiation, whichever name you want to call it. Now, the thing is, if you go up higher up the spectrum, you keep going up in higher frequency, you're hitting nuclear. You're hitting, it's nuclear. There is no difference between nuclear radiation and the radiation being affected by. The only difference is the cycles per second that's hitting you. So nuclear radiation is going a lot faster than 60 gigahertz. That's the only difference between the stuff.
But it doesn't matter. It's still fast, 60 gigahertz. 60 billion times a minute.
What they're doing is they're getting so close to nuclear, and they're really stretching the boundaries. What we call nuclear, and to gamma radiation, those sorts of things. We're talking about ionizing, so they're getting so close to the spectrum, it's not funny, and this is the problem. And for simply some person one day saying there's ionizing, non-ionizing, to try and differentiate between the two is absolutely wrong, in my opinion. Because at a certain frequency, it's when it changes. It affects the nucleus and affects the DNA and all that sort of stuff. Well, hang on, it's still the same stuff. If I'm being exposed to cyanide, it doesn't matter if it's a small dose or a high dose. I'm still being exposed to this crap. Okay, so but there's only a certain percentage of cyanide. Once you get to a certain level, that's when it's going to harm you. Well, hang on, I'm still being affected by arsenic, or cyanide, or whatever you want to call it. I'm still being electrocuted by this stuff. Okay?
Yeah, fair enough. But still, the independent science is saying it has single, double strand breaks.
That's correct.
That's
Yes.
at the nuclei level. It's breaking
So
it.
we
So
to
that's
yeah.
ionizing radiation.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
that graph they have, non-ionizing, ionizing, to me, it's fraudulent.
Well, it's extremely misleading.
Yes, it is.
Yes. Which
It's
it,
not
it
accurate. It's not accurate.
no, no, and this is the only way to deal with this is to put pressure on your members of parliament to make sure that and to get more medical practitioners, medical professionals into the safety guidelines process, the better.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of reports out there. Yes, the bio-initiative report's really helpful. Doctors like Ardell, Paul, and so on are absolutely brilliant minds. And and another Professor Johansson. There are quite a lot out there that have come out with these issues. But you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's really challenging because what we have in Canada, it's called multi-controlled opposition. The elections are basically rigged. It doesn't matter which one of the establishment parties they get in there, they're pursuing the same agenda, Raymond. So what we're
Mm,
trying to do is raise awareness and break through that, Raymond. It's a long process. People are
yeah.
programmed. People are afraid, right?
Well, what I
most
can tell
most Canadians think 5G is perfectly safe, and oh, I'm excited about, oh, I can download photos faster, videos, da da da. That's what the average Canadian thinks. Okay?
well, it's like if you can't see it, then it doesn't hurt you.
Yeah,
It's like if it's not,
exactly, exactly.
it's an invisible issue. Well, you could say the same about nuclear. You can't see it, but
Yeah, yeah,
it's dangerous. Everyone knows it's
yes,
dangerous. You look at Chernobyl and you
yeah,
can't see it, but it's there.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
But I want to get back to this rep Repatroli who advised on Safety Code 6, our regulations in Canada. Quote, the goal is to set safety limits that do not kill people while technologies work. Think about that, everyone. Think about it.
Yeah.
And what we know through our research, it's a cumulative effects. You could be a young boy, like in California, there was a tower beside the school. The kids started getting brain cancer within 5 years, Raymond. You could be a woman with your cell phone by your breast. You just keep it there. It's convenient. And there's so many cases of women getting breast cancer. Raymond. Another thing they do, a lot of the research is on cellular devices. Then you get doctors telling you that there's a false equivalency between cellular devices and cell towers. Can you believe it? Yet it's the same radiation. The radiation coming out your phone is from the cell tower.
Well, they're trying to tell
Yet
us that the radiation from cell towers is less than the radiation from your phone. I find that extremely misleading and absolutely
it's
insane to
false.
hear that.
It's false.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
false.
yeah. I agree with you on that.
That's
Yeah.
well, based on our measurements, that's false,
Mm, mm.
Raymond.
I'd have to have a
So
good look at the Safety Code 6. I'd like to do that and use a similar process. And I think you'll find that if I had a good chance to look at your safety code, it's called the Canada Safety Code 6
yes,
radio frequency exposure guidelines. And funny enough, you're using exactly the same frequency that we're using, which is 3 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz. Why
yeah,
on earth have they gone to 3 kilohertz and not on under that? Because a lot of the ELF stuff it can even be lower. They've actually found studies under the 3 kilohertz range that actually harms children and harms people. So they've gone. Why have they gone to 3 kilohertz to 300? Why haven't they gone from zero? Do you notice that
say
straight
say
away
again.
on your guide?
Say
If you have a
again.
look at your safety
Yeah, I
guidelines,
saw that. They have yeah,
they don't go anything because they say, oh, that's a different category. That's called extremely low frequency.
I
So
know.
there are no guidelines for anything under the 3
That's
kilohertz
pathetic.
range.
Yet Yet we know at low
And
frequency there's health effects.
and that's where the World Health Organization said at 0.3 of a gigahertz, and they were
Yeah,
working it out at 50 hertz.
yeah,
So they've worked out that, okay, well, if we just do a safety guideline from 3 kilohertz to 300, we'll remove anything under the 3 kilohertz
yeah,
range. We
yeah,
won't worry about setting guidelines. That's the very first thing I can see,
yeah.
which
Good
is a
point.
problem with
Good
your
point.
standard.
Excellent point.
Yeah, so
And
I
it's
think,
kind of disturbing. They go up to 300 gigahertz.
well, they've explained to you where they're going.
Yes,
That's exactly right.
exactly.
Yes,
People
yes.
should be very concerned. Well, like, this is just reality. I'm living in a good space now because I have shielding. I'm not near towers. But
Well,
anytime I go out in an urban environment, it could be even rural, you're still exposed, Raymond. You're driving
yeah.
by towers everywhere.
What
And
does what does exposure mean, Stephen? Exposure means being touched and penetrated by the
yes,
stuff.
yes,
So they're admitting already that, yeah, this thing's it's exposing you, it's touching you, it's
yes,
penetrating you,
yes,
which is an offence under the criminal codes if you don't consent.
yeah.
Simple as that.
Well, they
So
would
so
just
again,
say it's the sun. The sun's touching you, right? The sun's
well,
rays,
well,
right?
but you can't stop that in
I
a
know.
in a court action. You can't sue the Sun,
Yeah,
but you
yeah,
can certainly
yeah,
sue the
yeah, yeah,
telecommunications
yeah. Fair
providers.
enough. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think there's something I should clarify too with these. Like Elon Musk, the satellites, Raymond, based on our research, because they're very high up in the atmosphere, or at least the lower atmosphere, they're still quite high up. The good news about them is they won't be able to utilize the millimeter wave, as far as we
Well,
understand, because they're too far away. It's
no, that's
strictly
not correct. No, I
strictly
don't agree.
microwave, because the millimeter wave has limitations on the distance it can travel.
That so the higher the frequency, that's correct. The higher the frequency, the shorter it is. So what
Yes.
it means they're using beamforming. So what 5G is they're piggybacking on the low frequency bands. So basically, what they're doing is they're irradiating low frequency, which, as you know, can go extremely long distances. But what they're doing is they're hidden inside that low frequency band is the high frequency. It's hard to explain,
So
but
it's
it's
mixed
piggyback.
together.
It's mixed together. That's correct.
Wow.
So what you use the carrier wave, which is the low frequency,
Okay.
and the carrier wave is actually got embedded in it the high frequency. It's hard to explain, but that's sort of how they do it.
Interesting.
And if
It
I can get you a radio physicist who
I'd be
used to work.
interested in learning more about that.
Yeah, so it's about piggybacking. So
Yes.
they use 5G is not. A lot of people think, oh, 5G is operating at say 26 gigahertz or 60 gigahertz. Well, it's a whole combination of the whole lot. So it will operate 4G, 3G, 2G, you name it. It's a whole conglomerate of different frequencies, and they use for the beamforming. They're using the low frequency as a carrier wave for the high frequency, and that's how they're doing it. Yeah, if that makes
But
that's a
when they're using millimeter wave, the higher the frequency, there's still limitations on the travel going through objects and etc.
well, that's right. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a physicist, but from what I can gather, the use of the low frequency as the carrier wave, as you know, low frequency can penetrate. The other thing too is that magnetic fields, you can protect yourself from an electric field, and you can put up shielding and all that sort of stuff, but you can't protect yourself from magnetic fields. Magnetic fields will go through anything.
Yeah.
Literally, and that's the problem. So my concern, and this is why I've been raising it about the leukemia issue in regards to the microtesla or Tesla, microtesla, or Gauss is the same thing. It's all referring to measuring magnetic fields, and it's the magnetic fields that I consider to be more dangerous than the electric field, and it's the magnetic fields that are the problem. And the World Health Organization has said that. But the reality is that the penetration, whenever you have an electric field, you're always going to have a magnetic field. And no matter what frequency they're operating at, they're still going to be penetrating and touching us.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. This is unbelievable, the stuff we're discussing. Just where it's going. Um, we get a lot of questions, Raymond, and one of them is, well, why would they be doing this if they know they're going to be harming their kids?
That's it. Well, I guess that I don't. I've always thought that myself, and I think, well, it all comes down to the buck. And when you've got a corporation, unfortunately, your personal preferences to that don't count. It's all about making money and got to keep up
Control.
with technology. And
And also
we'll come
control.
up with
Yeah.
a safe way of so it doesn't affect people. The science so far, oh, we're relying on ICNIRP that says that it's safe, then that's fine. We'll go ahead. So that's sort of how I guess they're thinking. Oh well, if ICNIRP say it's safe, then it's safe. If our regulatory agency says it's safe, and so what I'm trying to say is the agencies, sorry, not the agencies, the corporations will only act within the safety guidelines that they've been put out. So they're saying, well, it's perfectly safe because that's if the government says it's safe, then it's safe.
Yep.
But then
Exactly.
it's like the tobacco industry,
Yes.
they know
Same thing.
all along
Same thing.
what's going on, and we're in the same with asbestos, and I what I'm trying to say is that 5G, well, not just 5G, but wireless radiation itself per se is probably worse by thousandfold as with asbestos than asbestos and tobacco combined. It's a real health problem facing us today.
Yeah.
And the warning signs are there. People like you and I are obviously realizing this, and I can tell you now, you've done a great job, Stephen. And as you said, for the last 3 years, I've been working on this for about 8, 9 years now. And I remember when I first started this, I didn't even know about it. I didn't even hear about it. Now everyone knows about 5G. Everyone knows about that it harms. So what I'm trying to say is that the message is getting out. It just takes a bit of time before it
Yeah.
really, the message it becomes a reality to everyone, and before you know it,
Yeah.
you're going to have to step. The only unfortunate thing is that hopefully one day someone's going to come up and say there's a real connection between the radiation and the virus issue. Whoa, we've got to do something that's going to cause a real knee-jerk reaction to the world. Will unfortunately is the only way I can see this happening.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hopefully, the problem with cancer, there's no absolute cause, so it gets convoluted.
well,
Raymond.
well, have a look at have a look at the cancer count. You'd have the same in Canada. Look at the correlation between leukemia and when mobile phones first came out. When phones first came out, roughly around, let's say 1981, around that time, childhood leukemia was a relatively rare disease. And even up until
Yeah.
2002,
Yeah.
the International Agency for Research on Cancer still said it's a relatively rare disease, but children shouldn't be exposed to zero point 0.3 of a microtesla. But you know what? Today, it's not the most common cause of cancer in children today is leukemia. Okay, you can see how from a relatively rare disease
Mhm.
now being the biggest proponent of cancer in kids, you start to
Interesting.
realise we got a problem.
Yeah.
And I'd say the statistics would be exactly the same with you in Canada. So
Yeah.
first of all, do some research, look at when
Sure.
mobile phones were first introduced into Canada, and then start looking at the cancer incidents, particularly with kids. And the
Yeah.
reason I
We've.
use kids, yeah,
Yeah.
it's because the
Excellent.
World Health Organization have already got
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
some
We
answers.
actually looked into that. And we know
Mm.
since the 80s, the cancer rates have almost doubled.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and why?
Across the board. And obviously, I remember seeing leukemia jump and other cancers.
Just leukemia is a, as I said to you, it's again the activation of dormant viruses, and to look into that. And I think this is something I've uncovered, and I've used this to assist in stopping towers and stopping small cells and everything. In fact, I used this same argument to stop an entire network from being established in this country. They cancelled the network. It was TPG set up they wanted to get in the mobile phone industry. They implemented, I think they already installed 900 small cells in the country, and they're about to put in another 1,800. And then I used some clients. We went through a process and explained, put them on notice. And in effect, they withdrew and they literally cancelled their entire network. And that was a huge win. And they apparently went through a $16 billion stoush with the Australian regulator in regards to corporations. There was a big fight. Anyway, they asked, well, what's the real reason you pulled out of the mobile phone industry at the time? And they said the real reason because there were health concerns, which were legitimate health concerns that were raised with them, and that's why they pulled out. So thank God for TPG doing that, because it really showed that there are some telcos out there that have a conscience. There are some that unfortunately some don't. But the reality is you just got to keep hammering them, and the only way to do it is to get individuals in your group who have got a grievance, they believe they've been affected, go and see a doctor, get some sort of, if they've got a reasonable belief that this stuff is harming them, the doctor diagnoses them, says, yes, look, I believe that their belief is real. Looking at the science, I believe that there is you don't have to say it's causing their problem, you just say there is a risk of harm. And that's where I use the risk of harm. So a doctor can say, yes, I can't rule out a risk of harm to this particular patient. In my belief, I've looked at her, I consider that, or him or her, that they shouldn't be exposed to this radiation, and the best way is to keep away from it. And that's enough to then start the entire process, because it then and it's really just a matter of sending letters and notices to the where the tower is located, and hopefully that'll remove the tower and they'll pull out, because they don't want to go through any litigation.
Excellent.
They know that.
Excellent. Excellent stuff, Raymond. I think we're going to close it down there. I want to thank everyone for your comments, and we will post some more links, and hopefully maybe 6 months we could do a follow-up, Raymond. We'll see where we're at.
Very happy to, Stephen. Yes.
But overall, Canadians, Australians are facing the same thing, eh? Like,
exactly. And the beautiful thing about Canada and Australia is that we both are under the same queen. We're both under very similar laws, and we Australians always see Canadians as being our brothers and sisters in a lot of things, and particularly in the legal game. And I'm sorry to hear that you're going through the same dramas we're going through. And the only way we're going to, I think, win the war is if we collaborate and do join heads and see what we can do to help.
Yeah, it just confirms what we're going through, Raymond. And I want to thank you a lot, and I look forward to having another dialogue. But let's see how it goes, and when we have some new information, let's get together and share it.
And vice versa, we'll do the same here in Australia. I'll get my people together, and if it's all right with you, Steve, we'll have a chat with you. That's all right.
100%, 100%. This is something we're passionate about. We see it at the grassroots level, but also we see the bigger picture of what we discussed, of what's coming. It's quite terrifying, and we didn't even talk about non-human life.
Well, that's
Birds,
right. Bees.
Bees, everything. We haven't even talked about that, right? So,
well, I can studies that show that livestock fertility for livestock is greatly reduced by exposure to radiation. In fact, I used that to stop towers and to compensate some pastoralists who have huge pastoral company who have got their cattle. They've got masts and towers within on their own property.
yes.
And there's plenty of science out there about the adverse effects to livestock. Very much so.
So this is so serious, but I look forward to keeping in touch with you, Raymond. Thank you for your work. I know our audience is grateful for everything you shared today, man. It's just great to collaborate and to share what we know, right? It just makes us all stronger, right? And this
Oh,
is
and
a
thank
big
you.
battle. It's a huge battle we're facing, but it's a it's a good side to be on, right?
It's well, you're on the good side. There's no doubt about it. So,
But
and
we don't want to we don't want to create fear. That's not our purpose today. I'm telling that to the audience. This is information that will empower you to make better decisions in your life. And I will just add, I've read studies. If you're within 400 meters of these cell towers, um, they were studies in Germany and Israel. There could, I'm sure there's more than that, Raymond, but there's a way higher potential for cancer. So be very careful where you're choosing to locate because this
what
is real stuff. It's real stuff. And I've experienced it myself. I've been to a lot of towers trying to document to help educate people. I've experienced some of these more of these sensitivity symptoms plus oxidative stress. But I
I'm sorry.
can't imagine Raymond having full on 60 gigahertz worldwide.
Uh,
What are they
I've had
like?
yeah,
Are these people insane?
yes, yes.
They must
I'd
be.
say,
They must be.
but we're not dealing with people. We're dealing with corporations, and we're dealing
Yeah,
with governments here. And we
yeah,
all know that, um, and a lot of it too is covering their backside because they
yeah,
don't, now that they know that it's like the tobacco industry, they knew, and so did the regulators at the
yeah,
time. But
yeah,
I guess the issue is that, and I guess that I always look at Erin Brockovich as a really good role model as to what she did with the fracking issue. And it's just a matter of just digging through all the and trawling through all the documents and pulling out. They knew, and
yeah,
the best one to do it, in my opinion, is to look at the World Health Criteria, number 16 from the World Health Organization in
yeah.
regards to
I've got it
radioactive.
written down. I'm gonna post a link to that, and I
Mm.
want to be clear. I said this already. They know here in Canada. They know at
Yeah.
Health Canada. The multi-controlled deep state opposition in Canada. They know. They
Well,
know so much that they've redacted science that would refute their policy, their legislation.
what happened in we had a just quickly. I had a godsend here when I told you we stopped the entire TPG network. Was because they happened to put a small cell right in front of a radiologist's who's a doctor in radiology, right in front of his child's bedroom. And that's what started the whole process. They didn't realise that the street also had other specialist doctors on there. And it's only when you put this stuff into doctors' backyards that they actually realise there's a problem, and they'll go to town with it. And so this here we've got radiologists who specialise in radiology know the harms of non-ionizing
Yeah,
radiation,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
it's just
Exactly.
mm. and
That's
and
a
and
go ahead.
and unfortunately, a lot of people don't react until it's actually at their front doorstep, and that's what happened here. And I feel great that we stopped the small cell from being placed in front of their house, but the reality is that they wouldn't have reacted if it wasn't there. They would have just, oh, who cares? It's not affecting me, so what's the problem? And
Yeah,
and I guess that's the what we've got to do as our, I guess my duty is to try and educate as many people as possible, and awareness as to what's really going on. And I think that's all we can really do, Stephen.
exactly.
Really.
That's
Mm.
our fundamental purpose at NCA, just awareness, because so many
Yeah,
people are misinformed. They're
yeah.
afraid.
People are stupid.
So,
They know.
but we're
Yeah.
very we're optimists at NCA, and we
Mm,
keep trying to raise the awareness. And when we get a critical mass that's aware, then we can start talking about meaningful change, Raymond.
mm,
But we're
mm,
not going to delude ourselves that we can do it now, because not
mm,
enough people are aware. And
But
but
I
we
think by
will. Yeah, go ahead.
putting that's why we formed the No5G Party here in Australia, was that we could see that people needed a voice, and there was a lot of people. I didn't realize how many people have been affected by this radiation, and as I said, it was basically put down because there was about 150,000 people on Facebook groups, and we just basically consolidated them and then formed this party called the No5G Party, and which became a registered political party, and then we then lobbied and put that in our policies, and then eventually, when elections came, the other political parties wanted our preferences and wanted to work with us. And we realised that the best way to do it, to beat the major parties, was to unite as minor parties. And that's how we got spread and said, well, look, we will unite if you have a look at our policies. And they looked at them, and then they started to realise that we're making sense, and they adopted our policies. And I think that's the trick, is with a political party is, and when we set up the No5G Party, our whole game was to get other political parties to adopt our policies and to start being aware of the issue. And that's really all we can do, really. And I think we've been very successful in doing that. And we're not there to get elected, obviously, but the reality is I couldn't see me or my party running a government. We're not that qualified, but we certainly can put the 5G issue on the map. And I really applaud what your political party is doing. And as you said, you're the only one in the country that's doing it. And it's a real pat on the back. And as I can say to you, we were the very first and the only as well, but now we're not. And so you just keep doing what you're doing and keep educating, and before you know it, your policies will be adopted. I have
Yeah.
no doubt.
Um, we can only hope, but the trajectory is pretty scary.
But
What
the
we
trick
were talking about.
is people to join you.
Yeah,
Get anyone
yeah,
who are concerned about electromagnetic radiation issues,
yeah,
smart meters, mobile phones, towers,
yeah.
lights. Get them to, if you really want to have a voice. The trick is to join the NCA, get behind you and your organisation and your political party, and make some waves, and which you're already
Well,
doing.
we're gonna
Yeah,
have to. We're gonna have to, Raymond. And it's just it's not here, not just here in Canada. It's worldwide. This is a
yeah.
phenomena happening all over the world. And the good news, it's bringing a lot of people together from other countries, like today,
Mm.
you and I, and because we're all
Well,
facing the same issues.
exactly, and
Yeah,
to give an idea of some of the influence that I've had, you probably heard about the issue that was raised with the Children's Health Defence Fund. You probably heard about that one. Well, I was involved in that quite heavily with a group called the Balance Group, and what it was is that we had the Children's Health Defence and the Environmental Health Trust and other groups that were putting in this claim in with the FCC in regards to the safety standards there. Now, the issue was is that it was a little bit loose jointed. So what happened is we got together, myself and some other individuals, lawyers particularly, got together and we formed what's called an amicus curiae, which is an intervener. So we intervened. We got a gentleman by the name of Joe Sandry to intervene. And then we got a gentleman by the name of Scott McCulloch, who's a great lawyer, and he's part of our balance group. And he was the one that actually headed and actually argued it in court. And he was the one that's successful in overturning the issue, or raising the issue and winning that particular point in the court. So what I'm trying to tell you is that we this is how it works. By collaborating and joining with other countries, etc., we can work together, and that was just one good successful
yeah,
issue in regard to our collaboration. So we'd love to, if there's any issue that you have, we've been successful in the United States, been successful in Australia. I guess the issue here is we'd love to help you, and I can certainly put you in get you to meet Scott McCulloch, get you to meet the ex-Harvard law professors that I've been involved with, and Berkeley, and some very strong advocates in the legal profession in particular, can assist maybe you in Canada with some of the
Excellent.
fights that you do. So very
Yeah.
happy to help. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is planting a seed, and there may be someone listening who has a tower right beside their home. They're
Yeah,
feeling sick. So that would be a perfect opportunity to take that
very much so. And it
to,
all starts, you
yeah,
only need one person to start to actually stop to give an idea, to stop that entire TPG network. We only needed one person who was a
yeah,
radiologist that was being affected. And the same thing with the Comcare case, where we got him for EHS. The issue is, yeah, you only need one person who's aggrieved, and then to sit down and work out the how to put the case together. And then a
sure.
lot of it you stop without even going to court. A lot of it you can just by
Yeah,
putting the telecommunications provider on notice, and they start to realise. One thing I learned in law is you always put your case up front, right? No hiding anything. You throw it out, very transparent. This is the law. This is how it works. Look at this. They realise, and they send it off to their lawyers. They realise, oh my gosh, these people are right. And that's sort of how it works. Right? So
yeah. And I just want to
it's
add
not,
one. No,
yeah,
that's really encouraging, Raymond. Thank you for sharing that. Um, and on a positive note too, and I think there's other countries, but I know France, Russia, they've
yes,
actually banned the use of cell phones. They banned the
particularly in children
use
in schools.
wireless
Yes,
devices,
in schools.
laptops, these other devices, plus in schools, but also cell towers near schools.
That's correct,
So that's
and
huge.
that's all reverberated around the point 0.3 microtesla issue. Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Okay,
So
and yeah, and it's really great to see that the French government have decided to do that, and full credit to them. And you'll see it being reverberated around the world. There are policies even here in Australia where mobile telecommunications towers are not to be placed within 500 metres of schools and stuff like that. So it's working. It's getting there.
yeah,
It's just
we're really backward in Canada. There's
well,
cell there's cell towers beside playgrounds, toddler playgrounds. Like we're
that's
talking,
just, well, yeah,
uh,
kindergarten
there's
stuff
cell
like that.
towers around schools.
Yeah, well,
Like they're
all you need is a
it's
parent.
sickening. It's sickening here. And
And
these crooked politicians, they know, and they're in bed with the telecommunication industry. So is Health Canada. Um, it's sick. These people should not be in power.
how to stop one around a school? It's easy. I've done heaps of them. Basically, what you do is you go around and you find one person whose
Yeah, yeah,
child's been affected. You then use the assault issue and also sickness issues,
yeah,
and you obviously go through that. But then what you do is you have a public forum. You get invite people, and I get myself and I get other people to Zoom in, and we have a bit of a chat publicly, or I fly over and meet them, and we have a public meeting about it. We then we invite councillors to attend the meetings from the local councils, and we get the local councils to get involved in abatement issues, so they can abate if there's a nuisance. So we're talking about nuisance issues now, and have a look at nuisance law, Stephen, and I think you'll find that's a very interesting part of law. Where if your neighbour is radiating electromagnetic radiation onto your property and it's causing a nuisance, the nuisance can be any form of discomfort. In this case, the discomfort is that the knowledge that's going to harm you, etc., and you know you're being penetrated by this stuff, then you can actually insist that the council issue abatement notices. And what we've done is invited councillors to come along. The councillors sometimes get overridden by the executive of the council, but once the councillors realise that they have power over the executive and they can actually tell the executive what they want them to do, the councillors will rally behind it. And I've had councils around this country that I've advised and chatted with and discussed who have actually put moratoriums on 5G. They won't allow it in their shire.
yeah,
So
yeah.
those things,
But it's
yeah,
different in Canada. Telecommunication spectrum is under federal jurisdiction.
yeah, but you've got to look at it, and you've got to look at it this way. Yes, there is federal jurisdiction, but you also have there are local jurisdictions, and you'll find that when it comes to a tower being approved or not, it's not the tower or the approval of the tower or anything like that. This is about a public health issue in regards to nuisance, and which is clearly in the realm of the municipal councils.
Yeah, but then
If
they argue, well, Health Canada says there's no health effects.
Yeah, but you got to understand there's
The
with
government says
states.
there's no health effects. We're following Safety Code 6.
Now, I'm not sure
So,
how it works in Canada, but in Australia, only the health is only in the prevail of the states. The Commonwealth cannot intervene under our constitution. So I'm not sure how the Canadian constitution works, but you'll find that there are certain powers that have been granted to the federal sphere under the state issue. So basically, yes, there are certain powers under the constitution that but when you look at it, I guess I would have to look into the Canadian angle. But in Australia, there are certain things that the federal government has power to make to regulate. There's things they can't, and if they start regulating things that are outside of their power to do so, then we pounce. And the issue in regards to nuisance, that's purely a power that has not been delegated to the feds. And
yeah, fair enough. Fair
regardless,
enough.
they like to hide it under a telecommunications.
Yeah. Another
Yeah.
problem here before we close off is a lot of these governments are in bed together. Like,
Yeah.
no, I'm just
Oh,
saying there's municipalities here like Kelowna, Calgary, Montreal,
yeah, they have a local government
and they're
association.
committed to 5G. They want
Well,
the
well, that's
5G rollout.
how it works here in Australia is you'll get the telcos will go around and they'll go around and sell we're going to help you out. We're going to make you the very first smart city in
Yeah.
Canada or very first smart city in Australia. We're going to give you all these incentives and we're gonna pay for this lighting in your park if you allow a tower to go there. This is what they do. And they one thing I found which is extremely concerning here in Australia is that the federal government was actually providing the local councils with funding to fast track 5G implementation in their
Wow.
cities.
Wow.
Now, it's not a form of there's some sort of I guess you say a corruption type issue here, where you're getting funding from a federal scheme to allow to fast track and to give preference to telecommunication providers in getting their approval for high impact or low impact facilities in building towers, then you start to see there's when you look at the trail and you look at the funding trail, it really opens up a whole can of worms.
It's the same
Um,
here too.
yeah, so you'd
It's
be
like
I'd say you'd be different to us.
it's like
You're
Kelowna's in bed with Rogers.
are they
Kelowna City.
there? Are they? Yes.
And
Are they? Or,
Rogers is one of the big telecommunications, so they're working to create
yeah.
create the smart grid in that city.
And they always bring in the code 6, whoever's behind your code 6,
Yeah,
and they bring them in with them to come along,
yeah,
and they pay for them to come along to meet with the council. But what the issue is that you don't get the other side argument ever raised with council. And what I do here in Australia is we get a chance to raise at 6 minutes in 6 minute increments where we can actually contest certain things and raise certain issues before councillors in council chambers, and that's what we use. And to give the other side of the argument, in fact, we've been so successful that we've now managed to have a first ever forum where the council has voted unanimously to have a forum on the 5G implications by having two sides of the story. They've invited the telecommunications industry to come along. They've invited the regulators to come along in regards to safety site guidelines, and they've also invited people like myself. In fact, I was invited to come along in my group, and so the council approved that. But you're finding that the telco are reluctant to turn up, and so are the regulator. But it's still going. It's still happening. There's a lot of pressure from the council to insist that they turn up. So that's what's going as we speak. And we're using politicians to force the government bodies, such as the regulator, to attend. to answer questions to the Australian people in these
Excellent,
forums.
excellent,
So
Ram.
that's the pressure we're putting on the
Sure.
the industry and the regulators. Yeah.
Excellent stuff. I want to thank you very much, Raymond. I look forward to having another dialogue in the future, and we can share more with our audience. And we rely on you, the audience, and we want to thank you for your comments. We'll be going through them and look. I've been looking at them, Raymond. I think you can see them as well, right? The comments, can
I
you?
can't, no, can't
I
unfortunately.
can't. So I've referred to some of them, but
Mhm.
this issue's not going away. But we will be back. We will keep sharing. I want to wish you the best, Raymond, and thank you so much for joining us.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Stephen, and
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. Thank you for
And thank you for the work you're doing as well.
yeah. Excellent.
So
Thank you.
all the best.
Talk to you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
all the best.